We begin with this Fox News alert and continuing coverage here on Fox News Channel as millions of people are on alert. Hurricane Florence exploding in size. And even though it's been downgraded to a Category 2, you've got to see how big of a beast this is. It is bearing down on the Carolinas as a much bigger, wider storm. The effects already being felt far and wide, with new warnings of catastrophic flooding staying in place, heavy rain from all the ocean water it's picked up, and life-threatening storm surges as it hits the coastline in the next few hours as we're watching. You are watching Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Melissa Francis, Town Hall editor and Fox News contributor Katie Pavlich, syndicated radio talk show host and Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall. Joining us today, Steve Hilton in the center seat, host of The Next Revolution and the author of Positive Populism. Great to have you.
Great to be here.
All right, let's get started. She is huge, and she is coming. Millions of people on the East Coast bracing for Hurricane Florence as that beastly storm bears down on the Carolinas. Thought it had lost some wind speed. The National Hurricane Center says there is nothing minor about Florence and warns the storm remains deadly because of its growing size and slow speed. FEMA Chief Brock Long warning people to not let their guard down.
Just because the wind speeds came down, the intensity of this storm came down to a Cat 2, please do not let your guard down. This is a very dangerous storm. Storm surge is why you have been placed under, many of you have been placed under evacuation, and we are asking citizens to please heed a warning. Your time is running out. The ocean is going to start rising along the coast and in the Back Bay and inlet areas and the Sound areas within a matter of hours. Your time to get out of those areas and storm surge inundation is coming to a close.
Griff Jenkins is on the ground for us in Atlantic Beach, North Carolina, where the winds and things are starting to whip up. The bands on that storm are very wide.
That's right, Harris. They've already started to come in a little bit. I want you just to have a look, our viewers to have a look at the pier here. This is the Oceana Pier, and you can see the waves just pummeling the end of that. And that is really concerning, folks, here, because this sort of storm surge that we're expecting, that predicted 9 to 13 feet, this is the front end of it. The authorities are very concerned as you see the threat, the bridge's stability being threatened. They're very worried to see this kind of activity this early before it comes in. Now, since I've been here in the last hour, we've had the mayor, Trace Cooper, and the chief of police, Jeff Harvey, of Atlantic Beach, both come down here and look at this pier with me. Look at this surge. Here's what they said they're most concerned about. Take a quick listen.
We're worried about what happens after the storm passes. We're just focused on safety now and making sure that our team is where they need to be to respond to any human safety issues.
Right now, I think we're pretty good. We're in contact with the EOC over in Morehead City that is connected to FEMA and all the other assets that we'll have, and we'll just have to wait and see with the aftermath.
Now, Harris, if you look, you can see the water standing here and the wind just whipping it out in these dunes that were put in place. But we are right on the front line of this dune line. And this dune line has been worked on for many decades as they've tried to preserve Atlantic Beach. And they're worried about the size and scope of the storm surge we're expected. At 11:41 p.m., high tide will hit here. And they are saying that that storm surge, 9 to 13 feet, will be not only above my head, but above my camera's head and above the top of the pier house here. That is a real concern on Atlantic Beach. Traffic has been stopped from coming on, but anyone can get off at any time. However, we are looking at winds. Just to give a little context, 2 years ago, it was Hurricane Matthew that came on here as a Cat 1. This is a Cat 2, and they're worried about a whole lot more water, extreme flooding, extreme rainfall, and the fact that this thing could park here for a while, Harris.
Are most of the people gone? Evacuated?
Most of the folks have left, but this is an interesting situation because of the flooding that occurred 2 years ago and the expectation of extreme flooding 20, 25, 30 miles inland in really low-lying areas where four rivers converge. A lot of the residents here decided when it downgraded to a 2 to ride it out and deal with it because they're worried about getting back here in their property. The storm surge that's going to put into these houses on Atlantic Beach is going to be that of Harvey, that of Katrina. And if you remember the mold, you've got to get into those walls. You've got to get it down quickly. You see a storm surge coming up a little bit now, but they've got to take care of their property.
Wow.
And so a lot of people are riding it out here much more than perhaps planned to 24 hours ago, but it is mostly a ghost town, and a lot of the low-lying one-story structures are definitely, those people have evacuated because of the amount of water that's going to come in here in the next 24 hours.
Well, Griff, what you say is exactly what we've been telling people, and that is that, people will see that downgrade from a 4 to a 3 to a 2, but what doesn't change is the fact that this is so slow moving now into the coast, and it's scooping up water along the way. That doesn't change.
That's exactly right. The danger, this is undoubtedly going to be a life-threatening, catastrophic weather event. And the danger is extreme. It's already deteriorating here, as you can see behind me. But you're talking about a combination of storm surge, extreme flooding, extended rainfall, power lines going down, and the wind. And you are talking about a very serious situation. You should not be out in this. At this point, if you're in northeastern North Carolina, you need to be hunkering down. We're hearing reports of power outages already, and of course, the unpredictability of movement. So if you're not gone, if you haven't evacuated by now, you pretty much need to get comfortable and be ready and be as best prepared as you can be.
We pray that people don't have emergencies, that they will need to call for help, because the authorities have already said you need to be able to have some sustainability for quite some time as this thing moves through. Griff Jenkins, stay safe. Thank you very much.
All right, let's bring in our chief meteorologist, Rick Reichmuth, for more on exactly where the storm is tracking right now. Rick, what can you tell us?
Melissa, I think it's interesting what Harris and Griff were just talking about the Category 2. I think, to be honest with you, we've got to figure out a messaging thing that changes over time, because a Category 2, when those winds come down, that doesn't mean that all of the energy in the storm, all of the moisture that's in the storm, all of the storm surge that's been built into the storm goes away the second that those winds come down. All of that is exactly the same. So we won't see that center point that has winds at maybe 140. We'll see it maybe at 105 to 120 gusts or something like that. But everything else remains exactly the same with this storm. And I think sometimes we do a bit of a disservice when we just focus on those categories to our viewers. So I just kind of want to make that point. This is what the storm looks like. You see what Griff was just experiencing here. That is going to go on for about 36 hours, and it will get much worse over the next 12 and kind of remain at that bad phase of it for probably a good 24 hours. So tornado concerns as well. That's always the case with the landfalling system, not like the Oklahoma Cat 5 tornado things, but maybe, a one F1 or an F2 tornado could pop up within this. So we have to watch that, do have that tornado watch in effect. This is the track of the storm. Curves slows down that Saturday at 8 a.m. That's 3 days, 2.5 days from now. Then it moves just about 150 miles here. So the hurricane force winds extend out 80 miles on either side of that. So that's a 160 mile swath of hurricane force winds. The tropical storm force winds extend out almost 400 miles or 400 miles all the way across. So it is a big area here that is going to be dealing with those winds. There's Sunday, and eventually by Monday, that high to the north weakens, and so the storm begins to move on out, bringing some rain, by the way, across parts of the Ohio Valley, maybe in towards New England as well. Not the kind of rain that we'll see here across parts of the South. But the winds already extremely are getting there, getting high. Some of the storm surge coming on shore. One of the problems we're going to have is the trajectory of this, those hurricane force winds. Because it slows down, pulls all that storm surge, and probably that storm surge will stay there through about 5 high tide cycles, and that is why we're going to see so much of that flooding. One of the reasons, the other reason, is all the rain eventually that's going to fall inland that wants to drain out while the storm surge is pushing it all in. The water has no place to go. Up to probably 40 inches. I think we'll see some spots 40, maybe 40 plus by the time we're done with this. And by the way, Melissa, we're going to be talking about some spots, interior sections, maybe about a foot of rain in across some of the higher elevations here. We've got some mountains about 4,000 feet elevation. That water will want to fall with gravity very, very quickly. Also, that ground's very saturated from one of the wettest summers that they've ever had. Melissa?
Wow. All right. Keep an eye on it for us. Rick Reichmuth, thank you so much. In the meantime, President Trump touting his administration's readiness for Florence as he defends his response to last year's hurricane in Puerto Rico and takes issue with the recently revised death toll there. That number, based on estimates from a study by researchers at George Washington University in D.C., the president tweeting 3,000 people did not die in the 2 hurricanes that hit Puerto Rico. When I left the island after the storm had hit, they had anywhere from 6 to 18 deaths. As time went by, it did not go up by as much. Then, a long time later, they started to report really large numbers like 3,000. This was done by the Democrats in order to make me look as bad as possible when I was successfully raising billions of dollars to help rebuild Puerto Rico. If a person died for any reason like old age, just add them onto the list. Bad politics. Sure. I love Puerto Rico. Speaking of bad politics, those tweets triggering a furious response from Democrats. The number 2 in the House, Steny Hoyer, saying President Trump's tweet this morning denying the official death toll from Hurricanes Irma and Maria are beyond comprehension and deeply offensive to the thousands of American families who lost loved ones. Only Donald Trump would try to make the deaths of nearly 3,000 Americans into a story about himself and his political fortunes. All this as the president says his administration is ready for whatever Florence throws their way.
My administration is in close coordination with state and local authorities, tremendous people working on the hurricane, first responders, law enforcement, and FEMA, and they're all ready, and we're getting tremendous accolades from politicians and the people. We are ready, but this is going to be one of the biggest ones to ever hit our country. Residents in the path of these devastating storms should comply with all evacuation orders and other emergency instructions. Protection of life is the absolute highest priority, and that's what we're doing.
Steve, let me give you some other numbers that are really important right now. 5 states have declared a state of emergency. 1.7 million people in the Carolinas and in Virginia is told to evacuate. 10 million people in the path of Florence. And instead, they're fighting back and forth about what happened in Puerto Rico. It is incredibly distasteful.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know why the president weighed in on this one.
The word that came to my mind was just completely unseemly. I mean, what is this about? I think that it's one of those moments when you really respect the elected officials below the federal level, because they're the ones often that deal with the things that affect people's lives, governors and mayors and so on. They're doing the really hard work on the ground. Of course, the federal government will be there to help. I'm sure President Trump's completely right and quite rightly putting the resources of the federal government there. But this political argument is really, as I say, unseemly. I mean, it's just, what are we doing?
Yeah,
I don't know. It cheapens us as a country.
And
because we could do more for people around the world and at home than anybody else on the planet. We do. We are so heart-filled when it comes to the rescues and all of this. To have that be the conversation right now.
But I think it says something about what's going on. I mean, it's a phrase that others have used, the politicization of everything these days. Yeah. And let's be honest, this began during what happened in Puerto Rico, because I remember very clearly at that time, I felt the same emotion about what was being done in terms of attacking President Trump. You saw the mayor of San Juan, for example. I mean, she was practically a co-host on MSNBC during that time.
She was printing T-shirts.
Going on and on and on about, and before it was even clear exactly what had happened. And so the politicization has been going on for a long time.
Katie, I understand the president's frustration in the sense that he has worked very hard to help Puerto Rico. And when you look at the crumbling infrastructure that they had before, and also the fact that they're an island, so you can't just drive there to help, that really the effort to help them has been Herculean. But to take up on the issue of how many people are dead is so disgusting.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that the politics of hurricanes didn't start with Donald Trump. It started with George W. Bush and Hurricane Katrina, when there was a huge back and forth between what the local government didn't do, what the federal government didn't do. There's that famous photo of President Bush flying over and looking down on Air Force One, and people said he was out of touch. That's when it really started to be something that people use as a political argument. To argue over these numbers, I think that that's for another time. There can be valid questions about how these things are determined, who's more responsible, the federal government or the local government, in terms of response or preparedness. The problem right now is that's a huge distraction from the preparedness for this current hurricane, and it doesn't allow local and federal officials to learn from the mistakes of what happened. There are always things that can be improved. Nothing ever goes 100% according to plan. That doesn't mean that people didn't try to prepare as much as possible, do as much as possible, and get the resources resources on the ground ahead of time. And also, I think, comparing apples to oranges. You know, Harvey, there was a death toll of 82, I believe. Puerto Rico, we're looking at a number of 3,000. What is the reason for that? There are obviously different conditions on the ground for that, and you can learn from each one depending on what we have to face going forward, because there will be another hurricane in Puerto Rico, and the local government has an opportunity here to take some responsibility and build their economy so that they can sustain something like this in the future.
Leslie, why can't we put our politics to the side right now in the face of this storm?
We should, but the president didn't, and the president hasn't. And you can never, left or right, no matter what office you're in, try and turn a disaster into political victory. I understand his numbers are down. I understand that we're months away from the midterm elections. But one of the things people are looking at, which they don't want to see, I think, in the president, are the self-accolades. One of the things I did like when we just saw the press conference is he used the words they more than I. You know, they're ready. The first responders are prepared. They're ready. Another thing I think on a local level that the communities are looking for, and to your point about Puerto Rico being an island, absolutely. I mean, right now we're seeing in North and South Carolina and Georgia an infrastructure, if you will, with the federal government and FEMA and that response program, much more prepared than Puerto Rico. But people are going to be, look, where's the distribution? Water, for example, that they found wasn't distributed properly in Puerto Rico. Food, shelter, and healthcare. They are going to look to that. But quite frankly, I really don't think that comes to their mind, most Americans, when they go to vote. I really don't. So there shouldn't be a reason why anybody should politicize this. However, funding, that is essential. To take money from immigration, and Homeland Security has assured that ICE is going to pull back, and they're not going to.
That was an example of exactly what you're talking about. That was politicizing it, and it turned out not to be true.
Right.
But this is not what people are going to vote for when they go to the polls in November. And this is why I think whether you're the president, whether you're in a local office in any of those states, you don't politicize this. This is about people and preparedness and getting the supplies they need to them in a timely manner.
I think one of the complicating factors when you talk about death and loss and all of that is that it becomes about the numbers and not about the people. Right. And having been to Puerto Rico many times with my family and seen that beautiful place torn apart by a hurricane as we brace for another one, we know it really is about the people. And it isn't just the people who may, you know, have lost, and our hearts and our support are with them, but it's the people who will be tasked with rebuilding and quite frankly an infrastructure that didn't support them even before the storm.
That's exactly right.
So it's hard. Yes. I understand that there's forensic that needs to be done. I mean, you were in support of the former Prime Minister in the UK, so you know that it takes some time and some stick-to-itiveness to find out exactly what happened forensically, but we know that the number is north of teens. We know we know that. So at this point, I don't understand politically why anybody would even wade into that, whether it's the president or anybody else. Let's let the science figure that out, and in the meantime, let's lead with our hearts, because we got another beast coming in this way, and we got to be able to focus in on that.
Not only,
go ahead.
I mean, 18 is, on your point, 18 is too many. 3,000
is too many if it's your family. If it's your family, one is too many.
Absolutely.
So, and I mean, we will be able to talk about politics forever, but to support the families in all of these, I think this is the time to do that.
The Carolinas already starting to feel the impact of Hurricane Florence as the massive storm churns closer to the coast. Forecasters warning of epic flooding and devastating storm surge. An update ahead on conditions there, with the clock ticking for residents to reach safety. Plus, Google under fire again. Have you seen this story? After the leak of a video showing top executives slamming President Trump's election victory and the voters who helped him win. So were they just trying to blow off steam, or is this evidence of political bias in Silicon Valley?
No.
The debate.